first off, ischemia, this basically refers to reduction in blood flow. And what reduces blood flow? Well, the obvious thing would be blood clots, also atherosclerotic plaques. These are basically fatty plaques, also contain cholesterol, that basically can attach the heart wall, particularly the arteries. But what, of course, these do is restrict blood flow. They reduce blood flow. They can reduce or result in ischemia. And also vascular spasms that we saw, remember? You get constriction of the smooth muscle, contraction of the smooth muscle, that causes vasoconstriction. And ischemia, okay, can be due to anything. Blood clots, vascular spasms, or the atherosclerotic plaques. These atherosclerotic plaques are formed in what's called atherosclerosis, which has a lot to do with your diet and exercise, or lack thereof. If you have a diet that's high in fats, particularly saturated fats, and you get very little exercise other than punching those buttons on the remote, okay, you're probably going to be a big candidate for atherosclerosis. And by the time you get to be my age, you know, you're just ragged, okay, because your arteries are clogged, and they may be damaged as well, and you may be forming blood clots. And the result can be myocardial infarction, or known as heart attack, or stroke. Transient ischemial accident, stroke. We'd like to avoid that. And back in the 70s, we were involved in a little expedition in Southeast Asia called the Vietnam War. And of course, a lot of the soldiers over there were young, in their late teens and early 20s. And when they did autopsies of some of the dead, they found that these young men, supposedly in the prime of health, already had signs of atherosclerosis. They had these fatty plaques forming in their arteries, even in their 20s, which tells us something about our diets and our lack of exercise. Typical Western diet is horrible. We eat terribly. We eat fats that are too high in food, in fat, okay, and too low in fiber, too much sugar and too much salt. And the result, of course, is disease. In fact, we tend to die of diseases because of overconsumption and malconsumption. What's the biggest killer? Heart disease, okay? Largely because of our crappy diets and our lack of exercise. Anyway, hypoxia, we talked about that before. Hypoxia is inadequate oxygen supply, and it's usually due to ischemia, reduction of blood flow. Now, in the heart, this can cause a temporary weakening of the heart muscle, but not death, and usually it's indicated by chest pain, okay? Myocardial ischemia. And that's typically referred to as angina or angina pectoris. And that's sometimes confused with heartburn, okay, which has nothing to do with the heart. Heartburn has to do basically with regurgitation of stomach contents, which of course are very acidic because the hydrochloric acid we secrete there, that irritates the lining of the esophagus, and you get this burning sensation. And since it's close to the heart, the esophagus, sometimes called heartburn, okay? But if you've got a heart problem, this can be very scary because, you know, is it indigestion or is it a pending heart attack? Okay, but this usually is a warning sign. You've got chest pain, it's persistent, okay? You should be checked out. If you have blockage in your vessels, resulting in ischemia and hypoxia. Now, cardiac muscle itself is quite adaptable when it comes to nutrition, but not very adaptable when it comes to oxygen supply. Cardiac muscle, you can see, unlike skeletal muscle, can use a variety of fuel molecules. These are molecules that are taken in by the cell, broken down to release energy, some of which is trapped in ATP, which all cells have to have. They have to have energy. Our cells can't make energy. We simply tap energy sources. Okay, so we're not making energy, all right? We're making ATP, which is a major energy storage molecule. But to do that, cardiac muscles can use glucose, which most cells can use. They can also use fatty acids, which remember are breakdown products of fats. They can also use even lactic acid, which is a waste product generated by lactic acid fermentation. So they can use a lot of different fuel molecules. The problem is they form their ATP almost exclusively by aerobic cellular respiration. Aerobic means requires free oxygen. So they have to have a good oxygen supply. And therein lies the problem. If the blood flow is reduced or cut off, the cardiac muscle will die. Unfortunately, it cannot regenerate itself. It doesn't have the ability to regenerate, unlike smooth muscle. And in the body, in the center, there's no regeneration. When that cardiac muscle dies, it's replaced by scar tissue, dense fibrous connective tissue, which is non-contractile. So with each heart attack, even minor ones, this weakens the heart until eventually the big one. And that may be the one that's fatal. And again, cardiac muscle is dependent on a good oxygen supply, which means a good blood supply. And that's why it's so critical to keep the blood flowing, especially the heart muscle. Cannot operate efficiently on oxygen debt, which skeletal muscle can do, for brief periods of time, turn on lactic acid fermentation, but not cardiac muscle. Again, as I said, damage to cardiac muscle fibers due to inactive blood flow, and thus lack of oxygen or other nutrients can result in permanent damage. And again, the heart muscle doesn't regenerate, it's replaced by that non-contractile scar tissue, dense fibrous connective tissue. Any questions? All right. Let's get into physiology. Now that you know the basic heart anatomy, blood flow through the heart, circulation in the heart wall, let's talk about the conduction system, which we'll be looking at tomorrow in lab. We'll be doing EKGs. One other thing. As I said, the heart has built-in special cells that actually generate and conduct action potentials. So these cells are no longer contractile, they're more like nerve fibers. They can generate and conduct electrical impulses. So this is called the intrinsic cardiac conduction system. And these cells involved in it are called autorhythmic cardiac cells. They're non-contractile, they're self-excitable, that means they jump around. It means they generate action potentials and send them on to other cells. Okay? So they generate repeatedly action potential and distribute them throughout the heart. This is what stimulates the heart to contract. The cells of the cardiac conduction system or intrinsic conduction system. So let's look at the components of the cardiac conduction system, which I'd like you to know. We start with what's called the sinoatrial node. Now, all portions of the cardiac conduction system have the ability to generate and distribute these action potentials, but not at the same rate. So we start here with the sinoatrial node, SA node for short. And this is a massive cardiac conduction system, tissue rather, in the posterior wall of the right atrium, just inferior to the entrance of the superior vena cava. So it's the back upper part of the right atrial wall. And this is what's termed the heart's natural pacemaker. This is what determines the resting heart rate, contractions per minute. The reason that it's the natural pacemaker is it has the fastest rate of depolarization of all the cardiac conduction system. What do we mean by depolarization? Hopefully that's familiar.
Getting ready for the next action.
Okay, remember back from A&P1, here we go again, okay? When you talked about skeletal muscle, I'm sure you talked about conduction, okay? Action potentials and rate of potential and stuff like that. All right. Only certain cells can basically change what's called the resting membrane potential. All living cells have a resting membrane potential, which means what? They got a different charge on either side of the membrane. It's not the membrane itself, it's a fluid on either side. So the extracellular fluid and the intercellular fluid. The normal cell has what charge in the inside of the cell, in the intercellular fluid? Positive or negative? It's what?
Negative.
It's more negative. Outside it's more positive by virtue of the ions that are there. Outside, heavy and sodium ions, which have a positive charge. Inside the cell, you got a lot of proteins, you got a lot of phosphate ions, which have a negative charge. Okay? This is called the resting membrane potential. Only certain cells, though, can change that. And these are excitable cells, or self-excitable cells, which would be neurons and muscle cells. Okay? So what happens is, with proper stimulation, we have voltage-regulated ion gates, or channels that open up. When that happens, what flows in? Sodium ions, because you got more negativity on the inside of the cell, so the positive charged ions are going to be attracted. They're going to flow in. They reach a certain point basically, and what happens is you basically reverse the polarity. It becomes more positive inside the cell. That's called depolarization. Because what you're doing basically is you're reducing the polarity. Very negative inside the cell, very positive outside, but as you bring in more sodium, positively charged ions, that makes it less polar. Depolarization, it's called. Okay? Then you reach thresholds, and you actually reverse the polarity, and now it's more positive inside the cell. The cell, though, wants to return the resting membrane potential. That's called repolarization. So how does it do that? How does it restore? It's got to get rid of those positive charges. Potassium ions. Potassium ions are positive charged ions, more prominent on the inside of the cell than outside. So the voltage-regulated potassium channels open up, potassium flows out, and that repolarizes or returns the resting membrane potential. So what we're saying here basically is that the SA node, the natural pacemaker, can generate action potentials much faster than any other part of the conduction system. And for that reason, it sets the resting heart rate, what is called the sinus rhythm. This is your heart at rest. Obviously, our heart rate's going to go up when you're exercising, or you're excited, or you're fearful, or you're angry, okay? When you're just sitting there, dozing off in class, okay? Ozoning, all right? Your resting heart rate. That's the SA node. Determine that. And notice its action potential generates action potential between about 60 and 100 beats or contractions a minute. Average adult, approximately 75 beats a minute. It'll be a little higher in women than it is in men of the same age, and as we get older, okay, it tends to slow down unless you got a heart condition. Okay, we'll go into that later. Okay, so this is called the sinus rhythm. This is the resting heart rate determined by the SA node. Between 60 and 100 beats a minute, roughly on average about 75 beats a minute. Okay, again, it's resting. Not jumping up and down, not excited, not fearful, not angry, just at rest. All right, that sends out impulses then throughout the atria. That's what's going to stimulate the atria to contract. And they contract at the same time, right and left atrium together. At the same time, we've also got impulses picked up by the rest of the cardiac conduction system. And the next thing in line is called the atrioventricular node, AV node. This is also in the right atrium, but notice it's in the inner atrial septum, and basically just up here in the tricuspid valve. That's picking up those impulses that have been sent out by the SA node, and it's going to delay them briefly before it sends them out to the rest of the cardiac conduction system. Which is fortunate, because what that does is allow the both atria to contract completely and shoot as much blood as possible into the ventricles before the ventricles contract. The more blood you get in the ventricles, the more blood you can potentially pump out. So you want to get as much blood in there, into the ventricles, before they contract. Okay? So it delays them briefly, and then sends them out. Why does it delay them? Remember, there are three notable things that affect conduction rate. You probably talk about these when you're studying the nervous system. One is whether the fiber is myelinated or not. Well, we don't have any myelinated fibers here, so that's not a factor. Another is temperature. Okay, higher the temperature, the faster conduction rate. That's relatively constant. Okay. The third is the diameter of the fiber. You may have talked about A fibers and B fibers and C fibers with a nerve. Remember, A fibers are myelinated, big fat fibers, and so on. Fastest conduction rate. Okay. And you got the B fibers, a little smaller. C fibers, the smallest of all, slowest conduction rate. So what determines here is the diameter of the fibers. The diameter of the fibers in the AV node are smaller than the SA, so for that reason, they delay the action potential. They delay the passing of the action potential on to the next conduction system. As I said, this is fortunate because it allows the atria to fully contract, pump as much blood in as possible before those ventricles contract. Okay. From the AV node then, we got another part, and this is attached to it. This is called the AV bundle, atrioventricular bundle, or AV bundle. It's also known as the bundle of His. Not his, but hiss, like a snake. Hiss. Okay, the bundle of His. And this basically carries the impulse down, or the impulses down into the interventricular septum. So we're going now from the right atrium into the interventricular septum, which means we're going into the ventricles. between the atrium and the ventricles. The ventricles themselves, well, while the heart itself, of course, the myocardium is what? It's full of these collagen bundles of the fibroskeleton, which acts like an insulator. So the only electrical connection has to be through these conduction system fibers. And the only connection then between atrium and ventricles is via this AV node. Okay, or I should say the AV bundle, which then is running down into the interventricular septum. It then very quickly splits into a right and left bundle branch. They give off branches, smaller branches, called Purkinje fibers or conduction myofibrils, and this spreads the impulse throughout the ventricles. And then they contract, again together. Left and right ventricles contract at the same time. But notice, the contraction of the ventricles doesn't all occur at the same time. Even though the right and left ventricle contract all at the same time, the conduction sequence of the ventricle is a little bit different. It starts with contraction of papillary muscles. The papillary muscles, remember, attached to the chordae tendineae at one end, and at the other end, the chordae tendineae attached to what? The cusp, or tricuspid bicuspid valve. That's what holds those cusps in place before the ventricle contracts. And then notice the contraction is from the apex to the base, which means what? It's going to start at the bottom of the heart and push that blood up superiorly to the exit, which will be what? The semilunar valve. On the right side, the pulmonary semilunar valve and the pulmonary trunk. On the left side, the aortic semilunar valve in the aorta. So it's basically squeezing and pushing the blood up, right up to the exit, which is the artery at the base, draining that particular chamber. Okay? So papillary valves contract first. This holds the valve cusp, tricuspid and bicuspid valve in place before the rest of the ventricle contracts, and then again from the apex, the inferior part of the heart, up. So squeezing or push that blood up to the ventricle, or to the artery draining the ventricle. Okay? Any questions on that? Okay, now if there are defects in the cardiac conduction system, this of course can result in irregular heartbeat, which is known as arrhythmia or dysrhythmia. And it can degenerate into something even worse, which is fibrillation. In fibrillation, this is where you have a very fast, uncoordinated contraction of atrial ventricles, which does not give an effective pumping action of the heart. Okay? And ventricular fibrillation can be especially dangerous. This can be life-threatening and requires defibrillation. You may have noticed on the walls of various areas around campus these kind of they're chartreuse, yellow-green, these bright little plastic things, the automatic electronic defibrillators. Okay, you open it up and it walks you through the steps and what you have to do. The first thing it says is call 911. Okay? But then you want to walk it through, and then you get everything ready. It's all charged up and set, and they say, you know, clear. Don't touch the body. Okay. Otherwise, you defibrillate yourself, because what you do is you put two big electrodes on the chest and run an electrical current. What this does basically is reset the heart. You stop it temporarily and then reset the rhythm, hopefully the sinus rhythm. So you defibrillate to restore the regular rhythm of the heart. Okay? Probably a good place to stop. We're going to start talking about ectopic focus and things like that. So, we're doing that. And if you have questions, write them down, because remember the day after tomorrow, Thursday, okay, today is Tuesday, okay, is our exam. Our chapter 17, 20, and 21, okay?